Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Maria sat on this sand, admiring the enchanting skyline of the Baltic Sea, sitting just like that. Maria was dressed in short athletic, almost men's shorts, dirty yellow in color, and the most ordinary black t-shirt sat cross-legged, resting her elbows on her skinny knees. Cold sand stuck to the exposed areas of her skin, absorbent cotton, and the illuminating wind blew her disheveled hair straight into her face. Maria came to this place whenever she felt her strength was running low, always when she needed a reboot and mental calming. Today had been a difficult day. From early morning and practically until lunchtime, she ran through various interviews where she was turned around, immediately recognizing Maria's peculiar past, where she was poked and prodded by the fact that the girl had no experience at all. Poked as one pokes a small, worn kitten with its muzzle. As a rule, a kitten does not understand what it has done wrong, no matter how hard and with how much enthusiasm it is poked. That's how Maria didn't understand. How could she get experience if they don't take her anywhere without it? But no one gave her an answer to this unspoken question, and no one could give her an answer. And she had no older adult relatives who could support her, at least emotionally. That's why now she just sat there, trying to abstract herself from all the problems, deeply breathing in the fresh sea air, sitting and trying to take away the feeling of awkwardness and even fear that had haunted her all today. Maria was only 19 years old, and she had not yet managed to get any education other than schooling. Immediately after coming of age, Maria had to move, like all the others, her classmates, from the orphanage to the home where she had grown up and where she had been formed as a person. The good thing is that she had a place to move to. The state provided her with a tiny one-room apartment on the outskirts of her beloved and native Finland. The girl was sure that she was not fabulously lucky. I bring up many of her friends. I study together with her and have not yet had time to provide housing. Maria would like to go to some college to study, or even better, a university. But she had no illusions about studying on a budget, although she had a state benefit. In addition, the apartment was already precious, and for utilities had to pay for themselves and a lot. Even with subsidies and Mars, his maintenance was also expensive. No matter how it went, it turned out that first you need to look for a job that would allow you to provide for your existence, and then to study at a correspondence or evening. That was the story of Mars. Maria found him on the day of his birth and immediately realized it was fate. A poor, obviously abandoned cat met her not far from the grocery store. All shabby, thin and wary, leaning on every passerby, ready to run away at the slightest danger, but still hoping for human support, it was obvious. Despair, pain, and the mute question for what? It was quite clear that before the terrible tragedy, his life had been quite prosperous in the best of times. Now there was a huge scar on the poor thing's back that had not yet healed when that fluffy fur had been mauled by unpleasant sorcerers. And there was a look of fear in her eyes. Maria just couldn't pass by this unfortunate sufferer. With her last money, she paid for expensive veterinarian's appointments, and, unable to part with the cat, kept it. So the fate of the girl was determined. Now she had to look for a job as soon as possible. After all, it was necessary to provide not only herself, but also a living defenseless creature that she so unwisely, giving in to momentary pity, sheltered. Since then, several months have passed, and Maria has had time to work at various and even unusual jobs. But for some reason, she never managed to stay long with a job as a hotel cleaner. She was simply fired without explanation. She was removed from her position as a beauty salon administrator. The daughter of her friend's daughter, her boss, needed this job. The job of a sales consultant was also not given to the girl. She was immediately kicked out of the place, realizing that she was too shy and could not perform their direct duties, namely to bore the few visitors to the expensive boutique. Maria also managed to work as a cashier at a gas station, but from there she had to leave by herself. Two bailiffs turned out to be motorists and colleagues. And the night shift in general, the young graduate of the orphanage had real problems from work. Today could have been no different from the previous day, but a miracle happened. and Maria was hired for a new job. Sitting now on a deserted beach, she still remembered how nervous she was at today's interview, how stupidly her eyes ran, and how she didn't know where to put her clumsy hands. And it came out like this. Since the morning of the escape, half the town already desperate, Maria skillfully took to her last interview, not even hoping that luck would suddenly smile on her. She was going to try out for the position of a waitress in a small coastal cafe. The girl had no experience in this capacity, and barely seeing the menacing look of the elderly owner of the establishment, she wanted to leave without starting the interview. But the hoarse lord of the voice stopped her halfway. "Would you care to open your pretty mouth and explain to me why I should hire you? Considering you've never held your nose in your life, what did you expect when you came here?" The owner of the cafe asked sternly. He was a short, thin old man. His bright blue eyes were hidden behind thick gray, wide eyebrows, and thin pale lips were almost invisible from behind a lush mustache. "I'm just looking for a job." "I'm sorry," Maria replied modestly and sank her gaze. She was already on her way out of his office. My hand rested on the round knob, and the only thought going through my mind was God, genius. Just get out of here. Busy. The old man smirked and folded his arms across his chest in a closed posture, not expressing anything good for the interlocutor. Isn't there any more suitable job in this city for such a young and beautiful girl? I clearly indicated vacancies with at least a year of experience. Maria blushed deeply. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't notice. It's just that I've already gone through all the websites and newspapers with vacancies. This is my 6th interview today. I'm sorry again for bothering you." She grabbed the doorknob again. But he didn't let her go again. There was a twinkle in the man's eyes. It was either interest or indignation. "Why do you need a job so urgently? Don't your parents help?" The girl, still holding herself by the doorknob, unconsciously pressed it even harder. "I don't have parents. I grew up in an orphanage." She looked at him with some challenge, as if to say, "Well, now you know everything, you can finally send me away." The cafe owner frowned. "Is that so? Well, in that case," he rose from his table. "In that case, how's your learning curve, baby? In a week you can figure out this job wide-eyed." The girl glowed with happiness. "Yes, of course, I'll try my best." The sullen old man suddenly smiled warmly. "Well, that's good. My name is Nick. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. I'll show you around, tell you all about it. The waitresses will help you with that too. You owe me your passport, medical, and employment records. Do you have it?" "Yes," nodded a completely happy Maria. "Of course I do." She gave the old man the most radiant smile she was capable of. And it was as if he had changed from the evil mutterer whose grandfather had no trace of him. Now a handsome gray-haired man with a smile and slightly tired eyes was sitting in front of her. "Well, Maria." Calling her by her first name, he tentatively accepted the resume. "Nice to meet you. See you tomorrow, and don't be late. I don't like lazy people or boring people. Don't worry. I'm used to getting up very early," assured him the girl, and left the cafe with a happy drinking heart. And left alone with himself, Nick thoughtfully nodded to some of his thoughts or memories. Picked up the telephone receiver, Dopatopic risky apparatus, standing on his immaculately neat desk and dialing a number, said to his invisible interlocutor, "This is orphanage number 27. I'd like to speak to someone from the administration." "About what?" "About one of your graduates?" "Yeah, okay, I'll hold." Sure." And Maria, having spent about 40 minutes on the embankment, returned to his home, having passed in order to save money 4 kilometers on foot, and burst into the apartment with a triumphant exclamation. "Mars, Mommy is already home." Fluffy, well-fed cat lazily pulled up gracefully, came out of the only room. Black-gray neck glistened, and yellow eyes were still half closed. Seeing that the furry lounger had passed all day waiting for his mistress, he glanced at his mommy, gave a short poke in greeting and rubbed at her feet. "Hello, hello." She rubbed the cat on the head. "After all, now you cannot say that you were once skinny and plush. Look at this, a man in full bloom." Laughing, she lifted the cat into her arms. The one didn't even think of resisting and parted like Kissel in the arms of his savior. gratefully silent. "And I have a job," triumphantly told him Maria. Yes, I've been hired." She turned the cat to her face, taking him under her front paws. Mars immediately twisted out of her arms and skipped briskly towards the bowl. He squawked loudly, as if complaining that he hadn't been fed in at least a week. The girl smiled warmly. Yes, my good man. I need a job to feed you." She followed the cat into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, pulling out a bag of power food for her pet and a small red-green apple for herself. One would have thought that the girl was on a diet, so she was restricting herself from dinner. But unfortunately, she had no money for more substantial food. Everything went to feed this sick, voracious creature. Maria didn't regret it one bit. So much for the trouble. Having finished the base of the apple and leaving only a couple of seeds from it, Maria began to prepare for tomorrow. She ran to the shower, twisted her short hair into simple rubber bands, and began to sort out her unpretentious closet, intending to look her best. She wanted to really shine. Late at night, Maria lay in bed and twisted from side to side without stopping. She couldn't fall asleep, and her mind was spinning with all sorts of frightening thoughts. What kind of team is there? What if I don't succeed? What if I'm cheated? And if to stir her consciousness, the questions did not stop and did not let her sleep. The first day of work, it's the most important one. She finally fell asleep, she thought. It wasn't until the morning. But contrary to Maria's worries, her first day at work went smoothly, even though she wasn't allowed to see visitors yet. But she had already gotten a full understanding of the workplace. Nick seemed like a real bitch to her now. He was muttering to himself every now and then. He noticed even the smallest flaws in the work of his subordinates. And when Maria was already sure that she would not see this job as her ears, the owner of the cafe praised her. He said that she did a great job, and very soon will be able to start a real job with official enrollment in the staff. Maria was not told this rata because Nick promised a decent salary and hinted at possible tips, which she could dispose of at her discretion. The amount that the owner of the establishment named, she had never held in her hands before, and that was for a month. In the other jobs, Maria received at most half of the sum quoted. But not everything was as good as it might seem at first glance. The collective, in which Maria was destined to work, turned out to be not exactly pleasant. Of course, some of these people were quite nice and kind, and some, to put it mildly, they were very peculiar personalities. Adriana, for example. The manager of the cafe was a low-slung, stocky, tightly bunched, middle-aged woman. Her face was pleasant, well-groomed, her manner polite. But all this was only at first glance. If you talked to her closer, it and the new girl Adriana pulled Maria's hand, and she almost dropped the tray shaking in her hands. "Are you deaf?" "No," Maria answered quietly. "Why?" she also asks. "Look at you. Doesn't anything embarrass you?" Puzzled, the girl looked at her hands at her clothes. Then she shifted her gaze to the half-empty hall at this time of day. Most of the tables were vacant, and bored girls and waiters were either flirting with the bartender on duty or scattered in corners in the back room, immersed in their smartphones. "Please tell me straight," Maria finally pleaded. "What am I supposed to notice?" Adriana rolled her eyes due to her small stature. She was looking down at her charge, and if you couldn't hear their conversation, you would think from the outside that it was Maria who was reprimanding her boss as a subordinate. That was the thought that occurred to one of the waitresses bored nearby. And she even shook her head to chase it away. It's an obsession. "Wow, Glitch is amazed." She said to herself, "You could use one of those, couldn't you? Look at you." Adriana, meanwhile, looked at all our girls. They all look like real models. It's important for business. The visitor should be pleasant to look at those who serve him. "What are you?" She carelessly grabbed the unfortunate girl by the edges, her long t-shirts brightly adopted. "Where did you find that rag in a dumpster? How could you dress like that? I'm asking you." Maria lowered her gaze again and examined her clothes once more. She was wearing thin black tights and her most favorite t-shirt with a funny cat face on it. She burst out nervously. "Nick had said I would wear a uniform, and until they gave me one, I dressed as best I could." Adriana seemed to boil over with anger. "I couldn't do it well. tastes absolutely nothing. And at the same time, go take a look at your face." She waved a small, full hand in front of Maria's face. "Besides, you need to grow your hair out. You look like a kid. And learn how to do a proper makeup. Ideally, of course, a nose to the forehead." What did he see in you? Oh, of course. How could I forget? Poor, poor, poor orphan. Squeaky, cool, theatrical voice stretched Adriana. "Ah, it's disgusting to watch." And the manageress, deliberately hitting Maria with her heavy shoulder, went away to the back rooms. And the newly appeared waitress, and a lump came to her throat, put the tray on the table and ran to the restroom. There she washed her face with cold water and dared to look at herself in the mirror. In the reflection was a young, quite pretty girl, quite short haircut. Beating all the big nicknames of hair was gathered in a small ponytail on the top of her head. Since the hair was short, in the ponytail was able to gather only a small part of them, and the rest of the cheerfully fluttered and were free from the multicolored shrinking rubber band's large green shade. The eyes hid behind hollow and long naturally dark lashes. The plump lips trembled, giving away Maria's last efforts to hold back from finally bursting into tears. She turned in profile, wiggling her nose. It was indeed slightly larger than average. It was a beautiful large nose with a slightly noticeable gorilla. Maria's favorite kindergartners had always told her it was a real Greek nose. The guys, classmates, speculated in jest that she had maybe Georgians or Italians in her ancestry. But all these insinuations quickly stopped already in the 6th grade, when from a small, ridiculous girl, Maria began to gradually turn into a fragile teenage girl. Her unusual beauty silenced the evil tongues, and their owners to seek reciprocity in the first love. Generally speaking, in general, Maria has never been complex about her appearance. But today, after all the harsh words Adriana had said, she wasn't sure that she was really beautiful. Well, or at least just pretty. And that t-shirt god, what was she thinking? Maria shook her head and chased the horrible thoughts away, and resolutely walked out of the restroom into the narrow hallway. She immediately bumped into another waitress. "Oh, Maria, I'm sorry." Thank God, it was the most ordinary, simple, and without any special pretensions girl. From the looks of it, she was a little older than Maria herself, and there was nothing in her appearance to catch the eye. Just an ordinary, rather nice girl. Nothing. "And you, I'm sorry, let me remind you what your name is." Maria tried to smile across the morgue at the blush in your eyes, Emily. The girl smiled amiably. "It's not a big deal. Don't take offense at Dasha. She is not like that. And most importantly, do not be afraid of her. She's just a little mean. She has a complex because of her height. I'm not an easy fate, you know." Yes, Maria nodded. "Thank you. I understand. You should." Emily perked up. "You know, maybe we could go for a walk after work, and I'll call Molly. She's a waitress too, and she's smart, remember. If you get the job, we'll work the same shift, the 3 of us." She tilted her head to the side and squinted her sly eyes. "Sure, I'm all for it." Maria looked at her new friend gratefully. "Listen, can you show me everything here and explain it to me properly? I don't know who to turn to. Nick seems to be in a bad mood." Emily laughed today, never in a bad mood. "Of course he is. Come on." She took Maria under her arm and dragged her into the large kitchen. There Maria was introduced by the cook to the various technical staff, and finally to one of the bartenders who had come here for a snack. After the shooting, each of the employees here was supposed to have a hot lunch. And if like this, Alec tried to be close friends with the kitchen, one could not worry about his food at all. Maria noted to herself that not everyone here was happy about the addition to the team, but there were no more like that horrible Adriana. Maria breathed a sigh of relief. It was better that she was not noticed at all than to be noticed and biased. Otherwise, apart from this incident, the day had been quite fruitful. At the end of the shift, 3 young girls were walking along one of the city embankments. They stopped at a small stall with ice cream and bought some for themselves. Maria, citing the fact that she does not like sweets at all, did not buy herself a dessert. In fact, she simply did not have money for it, and she was ashamed to admit that she was starving. They sat down together on a bench with a beautiful view of the water and began to talk animatedly. Well, tell me about yourself. Where are you from, and what are your hobbies? Why did you decide to work with us? Emily licked her ice cream with one eye, looking at her new colleague. Oh, I don't know what to tell you. I am the most ordinary. Maria answered reluctantly. Born and raised here. Why did you take the job? Wherever they took me, that's where I got a job. She smiled a little. I always wanted to be a marketer. Advertising, the service industry, has always been interesting. So I wanted to learn how the business worked from the inside. Molly, sitting on the very edge of the bench, lazily raised her voice. Then why didn't you go to school? Why didn't you go to school? Molly was older than the other girls. Tall, slender brunette. Dark eyes looking at the world distrustfully, and at her friends looking down on her. Maria squirmed involuntarily. She was embarrassed. Turned away from her new friends. There is no possibility, she muttered. That's why I need money to work at once. But the opportunity is always philosophical, said one, taking out of the pocket of his coat a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. When smoking with Riva, eyes sighed. There would be a desire and brains, she grinned. With brains you can even enter on a budget get any kind of scholarship. Yes, but I have to pay the rent. And I have a gluttonous cat. In general, it's all hard with sadness in her voice, said Maria. Emily came back into the conversation. Almost partitions in the play with their ice cream. But still, what kind of a good soul is our chief? No offense, Maria, but you're not doing a very good job. I mean, work-wise. And Nick took pity on you for being so inept. He's so hard on the others, though. Emily giggled. But please don't take offense again. Molly commented strangely and looked at poor Maria with a sidelong glance. It gave her goosebumps. Why did he take you on so quickly? I remember when I was setting up on my own. It was hell. He's a real pedant in our neck of the woods, and he needs experience, skills. Yeah, he even chases the cleaners around like they should be scrubbing floors and prepping the ore. I wonder why he's so attracted to you. Not to enlighten us in confidence, she turned to Maria and perhaps accidentally, or perhaps deliberately released a cigarette smoke right in her face. Non-smoker. Maria immediately coughed and waved her hand, chasing away the nastiness from the morgue. I don't know. She shrugged off the cough. Maybe she saw potential in me. Don't be ridiculous. Molly glared angrily at the girl. You live with your parents. Why do you pay the rent? Maria answered, trying to make her voice sound more confident. No, I live alone. I have no parents and no one. I'm on my own. Oh, Molly stretched out. That makes sense then. Poor orphans. Maria was taken aback. She had never been reproached so often in her life. Her lack of family, as she had been today, as if it was her fault, as if her orphanhood was somehow her advantage. So, she asked, almost defiantly, I'm worse than anyone else because of it. Did I react faster? No, of course not. What is this nonsense? You misunderstood Molly. She threw a judgmental look at her friend. Oh, calm down, both of you. Lazily muttered Dimka. I didn't mean anything wrong. It just explains such an unbelievable zeal for you, dearie. He's one of yours, too. What kind of ours are they? Maria asked. She was already seriously angry, and in such a state she was ready to fight to the last drop of blood, defending her good name. Of course, she immediately realized what Molly was getting at, but she wanted her to be embarrassed and explain her words. From the orphanage. Not the least bit embarrassed, Molly shrugged. That's why he took you in right away. You told him you were an orphan. I did? Maria marveled. Emily seemed surprised, too. How did you know that? From the camel. Smirked contentedly at the deal. I know a lot of things. You just have to pay attention. She tossed her cigarette butt into the trash can and pulled on a 6, rose to her feet. Well, come on, I've got to go. That day, Maria was very surprised to learn that her boss had grown up in an orphanage. It had always seemed to her that children without parents were unlikely to succeed in life. It seemed that those like herself were not capable of anything more than a simple average life. One day, one of the tutors said something to them, all that stuck in Maria's memory for years and years to come. He said, don't get hit and go to jail. and your life is already a success. Remember, it will be much harder for you not to give in to temptation than for everyone else. Then Maria thought with fear that her life was probably doomed in advance. She stopped dreaming, lost her youthful hope for a beautiful, bright future, and her only goal remained this very not to sleep. Maria didn't even hope for a more favorable life, not until she met Nick in person. He was quite successful. Although the girl did not know how exactly her boss lived, whether he had a family, children, what does he do besides his main activity? But she was sure, this is what success looks like. Yes, he was sometimes quite rude, cynical in statements, incredibly demanding. I mean, he had his own cafe. He's an orphanage boy. He managed to become the owner of his own business, the boss of a rather large team. After this message, Maria had a deep respect for the chief. From now on, no nagging from him could not break this strong feeling of hers. He became her ideal model, a living proof of the fact that even an orphanage orphan can achieve something worthwhile in life thanks to him, because of the mere fact of his existence. Maria had a purpose in life again. I have a dream that someday I'll have my own place. Yes, I will. Maria thought to herself. I lie in the arms of my favorite cat before going to bed. Her days of labor were changing one after another. The girl, engrossed in her new and promising, as it seemed to her, work, almost did not notice how the days flew by, how the seasons changed. She greedily absorbed all the information about the restaurant business, with interest, watching how her boss works. Although Maria was the simplest waitress, she tried to delve into all the intricacies of this activity. She closely followed the work of the cooks, tried to discreetly observe the harmful manager of the institution, watched how masterly worked bartenders. She wanted to understand how to manage her business competently, to understand and learn this skill. The girl's salary was more than decent. Now she had enough for both the cat and herself. Although she didn't spoil herself with anything like that. Sisma Tolsta is accustomed to be satisfied with little expensive clothes, did not buy for food. Did not spend a lot, even a new phone was not in a hurry to buy. And only Mars invariably received all the best and regular examinations by a veterinarian. The life of our heroine was gradually getting better, and she even began to save money, hoping in the near future to enroll in the correspondence department of a specialized university. Someday dreamed of her, and she will be able to open her own establishment and a small cafe or even a restaurant. Although the girl was sometimes afraid of Nick, but she learned a lot from him. In fact, he was not as strict as he wanted to seem at first glance. Yes, with the staff he was tough, nagged, told off, noticed all the little insignificant missteps. But in rare moments, when Maria happened to be with him for some reason, then Nick Dober calmed down. He was happy to share his knowledge with the girl, seeing how she was drawn to it and eager to learn something new. He was happy to notice how she differed from the other waitresses, and saw in Maria's big eyes a true, genuine interest in her work. While her co-workers were rushing home to finish their shifts, Maria was always ready to stay longer and help others if needed. She worked tirelessly, trying to improve everything around her. And after a few months, Nick himself began to consult with the young waitress in some matters. For example, it was Maria who advised the man to introduce a seasonal drink in the menu, which could be obtained for free. After the 5th visit to the cafe, the girl herself took the initiative to advertise the place on the internet. She created a page of the cafe in social networks. Not to mention that every day, passing by a small field, Maria brought a bunch of fresh flowers to work and beautifully decorated the central window. Noticing that the customers were attracted by the unusual interior, she persuaded the owner to buy some small things at the town flea market and arranged and hung them in the hall herself. Then they sewed new curtains. Then there was no end to the various innovations organized with Maria's light hand. At first, I just grumbled squeamishly, more for show. What else did that girl get into her head? And already spend a fortune on the restoration of this junk, which she calls, and vintage chairs. But gradually, there were many more visitors, and Nick was now often in a state of deep satisfaction. But who would have thought it would quietly and humbly turn out to be so creative? More than once and more than twice. The old man praised himself for such a valuable acquisition, smiling into his fluffy mustache and peering contentedly at the provoking waitress. Once in one of the most usual working days, there was another usual for Maria clash between her and the manager. Enraged by something, Adriana quickly moved towards Maria's side. Her eyes were burning with anger and her hands were clenched into fists. Hey you! Come here!" angrily hissed the manager to the gentleman. What did Maria think this time? She was already so used to the way Adriana behaved that not one of that pile of hurtful words that the manager functioned with didn't touch her in the slightest anymore. Oh, and it was obvious that she disliked Maria far more than the rest of them. Why didn't that question have a coherent answer? Perhaps it was some unconscious dislike, or perhaps something else. Figuring out the reasons for her constant discontent, Maria had no desire. What's wrong? Maria lowered her voice, fearing that one of the visitors might overhear them. The customers are complaining about you. I'll fire the hell out of you, shouted the manager, not paying attention to the surprised customers. That with surprise stretched Maria, complained about her. That can't be right. Who? When? I don't believe you, she said firmly, and added, by the way, you have no right to fire me. That's Nick's responsibility. We'll see about that, Adriana whispered quietly. Those 3 men you served last night, that's who complained about you. I'm gonna tell the chief, just so you know. If I don't, he will. You won't worry. Maria's thinking, what other men? What could have been disgruntled? She went through in her thoughts all those visitors that had served yesterday and could not understand who exactly she was talking about. Everyone seemed to be satisfied, she thought, and she was generally right, that satisfied customers could be identified by one simple criterion: the number of tips. Maria invariably left much more for the tip than was left. This she, and annoyed, and even pissed off sometimes her colleagues. But what was she to do? Perhaps it was because she was a little more friendly and a little less arrogant. Trying to remember who Adriana might have been talking about, she suddenly realized for sure it was the same drunken idiots. Last night, just before the cave closed, 3 dubious-looking men had piled into the room. Maria immediately realized that they were already well drunk. It was noticeable not only by the stellar behavior of the men, but also by, respectively, the ambergris that emanated from their warm company. And yet Maria, putting on a friendly smile, approached their table. Good evening. Are you ready to order? The drunkest of the party, and obviously the oldest of them, stepped forward. Get a Coke and a drink, and hurry up. Maria covered her eyes, trying to regain her former friendliness. What exactly can I get you? She reached over to the menu on the table to open the page that listed the alcohol available. Pick something specific, and I'll get it to you in a jiffy. But the man poked at random at the menu and got married, if you will. Maria smiled dazzlingly and was about to move to the coffee bar, and suddenly received a very sensitive slap from one of the customers just below her back. In addition, he once again shouted after her at a run, and loudly and completely horse-like barked. Maria, dumbfounded by such insolence, remained silent and hurried away from the table to a safe distance. She flashed with indignation, went to the bar and said to James Berman, "What kind of assholes are these? I hate them." The guy, not at all distracted from making cocktails, and stretched in response. Yeah, it happens." And Maria continued to resent him. "And we don't have male waiters. What am I supposed to do? I don't want to serve them." She looked hopefully at her colleague. "Maybe you served them." "Oh no, baby," James said. "I'm not that kind of guy. You'll have to do it on your own." Maria frowned and took a deep breath. She took the order for the unpleasant men, and trying not to show her anger, went back to the table. For the next hour, the tipsy customers drank again and again, and it seemed that there was no end to it. They were making noise and behaving in a completely inappropriate manner. The girl even managed to regret that the institution works until the last customer. It had been her idea, but all things must come to an end. When the drunks asked for the bill, Maria was overjoyed. Well, go away, she thought to herself with relief. Leaving, one of the drunken men called the waitress again. "Hey, honey, come with us for a walk. But don't say no. I don't like to be refused." He smiled predatorily and approached Maria almost closely. poor thing was immediately infected by the thermonuclear smell of alcohol from his open mouth. She instinctively almost vomited. "No, thank you. I need to go home. Not without me, bitch." He grabbed Maria's arm roughly. "Let's go," I said. Maria stared helplessly. Unfortunately, there was no help from anyone. James was cleaning glasses with a serious face. All the other girls had long since gone home, screaming for help. Maybe a kitchen worker from the street would stand up for her. But he's not here right now either. And Maria, not knowing what to do, blurted out the first thing that came into her head. "Oh, yes, of course. All I have to do now is close the shift." She overpowered as best she could both the nastiness and the feeling of nausea smile at her abuser and twisted out of his flexible clutches. Now, just a moment, freed, she took a couple wide steps back and quickly headed for the back room. The man shouted after her, "We're waiting for you outside." Disgusted, she laughed. He left the place with his buddies. Maria was finally able to breathe. She huddled in the furthest corner of the back room, leaving James to close up the place and do all the evening formalities. And only an hour later, having made sure with the help of the surveillance camera that the horizon was clear, left her hiding place and hurried home. "Hello. Over." Adriana waved her hand in front of the face of the negligent waitress. "What are you thinking about? Are you ashamed of yourself? I repeat, you are being complained about. You're closer to being fired than ever." Maria, waking up from her long thought, politely replied, "You're talking about those drunks. What didn't they like? They certainly left happy." "What are you talking about?" "This afternoon, they came back disappointed." "Adriana," the voice sounded viciously aggressive. The waitress asked in surprise today, "Who does that?" "This is the first time I've heard of such a thing, to come back with a complaint only the next day." Today, Adriana teased his charge in the nastiest voice possible. It was today that they came to file a complaint. They said our waitress cheated them. What do you say to that? Maria looked up and firmly looked the manager straight in the eye. For the first time in a while, she was ready to fight back against Adriana. "Look, you're on to me now. I have served these people with dignity far better than they deserved. All my own. I performed my duties to the highest standard. But do you really think you have the right to demand that I go with them to the middle of nowhere? That's absurd. My only deception was that I came back from their persistent solicitation of a certain nature. You seriously think that's grounds for dismissal?" Maria's eyes through real lightning. Adriana puffed angrily. "Why did you agree then? Why did you promise? It's irresponsible." Shouted, she suddenly squeaked to the left, as if Maria herself had been deceived in the best expectations. "I was just defending myself that way." He grabbed my arm. I didn't know what else to say or who to turn to for help. Maria thought to herself, "Where were you at that time?" Adriana was embarrassed and looked away. And then a man came from behind. He silently approached the arguing female employees. And it happened that only Maria noticed his presence. Adriana continued to fiercely shove her subordinate. One must work in such a way as to give oneself completely to one's work. "Where have you been? I don't concern you anymore. I come and go as I please." "I see." At these words, the supervisor standing behind her curved his lip and frowned unhappily. And Maria smiled contentedly at his reaction. But the furious manager simply didn't notice it. She continued, "And here I would go for a walk with them, if it is important for work, that it was difficult for you to spend the evening in the company of men. And now I have to deal with disgruntled customers. I will fire you today." Adriana, your reaction to Maria's perfectly appropriate behavior. I am unpleasantly surprised. The chief's menacing voice behind her back had the effect of a bomb going off. Adriana did not expect such a turn. She almost jumped and turned around sharply. Nick was speaking slowly to her. "It is important for our work that the manager of the cafe is always at his workplace. Besides, Maslov has no drunken visitors, and even in such a shameful way. What you propose to perform, Maria, is not exactly our profile, and they shouldn't have been allowed in the establishment at all. You were the one who should have been selecting the guards a week ago. Isn't that what we agreed to at the last meeting? But I can see Maria did just fine without you. I'm thinking more and more often The chief paused deliberately. Adriana pulled her head into her shoulders and stood as if at bat, waiting for him to continue. More and more often I think that she would have been much better. And the manager finished the chief and looked meaningfully into her eyes. The astonished Adriana opened her mouth and darted her eyes in surprise. Unable to respond to such a tirade, but a few seconds later she just burst into tears. Of course, Maria, you always protect your own. She's the unfortunate one here. She put her fingers to the corner of her eyes, imitating a child's crying. Keep pitying that little chicken. As for me, I'm leaving this rotten hole immediately. She threw the folder with the new menu she was holding and rashly rushed out. Nick frowned in his usual manner and then looked at Maria, who stood, frozen in shock, and grinned. Events seemed to be moving much more quickly than I had anticipated. Oh well, as they say, it's all for the best. The chief left Maria completely bewildered, wondering what would happen next, and retired to his office. Here he sank heavily into his chair, stroking his mustache thoughtfully. He had been thinking for a long time that Adriana should have been fired. In the first place, he suspected that the yard manager was howling for change from the till. And secondly, that horrible temper of hers and the way she behaved with her subordinates. How many good employees had already left who worked with her? Really? Adriana worked at the cafe for years, and at first he was very satisfied with her. The old man thought deeply. Nick could seem any way he wanted: cynical, picky, overly pedantic. But he had never been cruel or unfair to his employees, and his sullen style, his aloofness. In him nurtured one terrible incident that happened in the distant past. In one absolutely not beautiful day, a young and promising businessman lost his entire family in a car accident. The plans to spend a quiet weekend with his wife and 2 children at the country house failed miserably. When Nick received a call from one of his business partners informing him of a sudden change in his business schedule, he had to cancel the trip, and he assured his wife that he would come the next day by train. And they let them not deny themselves the pleasure of warming themselves in the spring sun in close proximity to the bay. So the family went by car without him. Toward lunchtime, he received a call from the emergency services that there had been a terrible accident on the bridge. None of his family survived. His wife and 8-year-old son died on the spot, and his 16-year-old daughter was rushed to the hospital the next day. That's how he lost all his loved ones in an instant. Failure has haunted him ever since. A once thriving business languished without the attention of its owner, and an entire chain of successful restaurants was run over by fast food giants. And now at the end of his life, he was just a miserable old man, still unmarried, childless, and disillusioned. All he has left is the small waterfront cafe he was the first to open. A 3-room apartment in the center of Finland and a long-abandoned house on the shore of the Gulf of Finland. He had already given up hope that he could be happy again. But then, at the very end of last summer, this young shy girl came to him for a job. She reminded him so much of his dead daughter. Nick turned on his computer, opened the video surveillance screens, zoomed in on the central hall, and looked at her closely again. This girl is so fragile and so strong. She too has had her share of suffering in this life, just like him, who himself had lost his parents as a very young child. His father died in the early days of the war, and his mother died of cholera in evacuation. Now it seemed to him that his fate and that of this young girl were somehow connected. Why had she caught his fancy? Maybe it was just senility behind the brackets. But sometimes it seemed to him that this Sorokin had the soul of his dead daughter's smile. His Marinka was smiling the same way. God, he seemed to be going crazy. He stared at the images on the screen again. Maria was taking orders from another customer and chatting cheerfully with them. He smiled involuntarily, looking how haughty she was. At first, the couple relaxedly discussing their choices with her. It's always like that with Maria. It's like she brings out their best qualities in people. It seems that he has finally made this important decision for himself. Nick turned off the computer, stood up and headed downstairs with a firm step. Maria finally had the day off today. She decided to spend it the way she had long ago planned to spend the whole day in bed, cuddling Mars. and now she was lazily lying in a pile of colorful pillows, stroking her big cat, occasionally falling into a shallow, pleasant sleep. She was snapped out of this marvelous pastime by a sudden phone call. It was the chief himself. What could have happened? She quickly answered, frantically jinxed again. "Hello, Maria. Good afternoon." No distractions. Pan's calm, slightly husky voice always had a calming effect on her. "No, why?" replied the girl, assuming an upright position. "Is something wrong?" No. What do you mean?" "Yes. Can you come to work right away?" "Next week, I'll make up for your lost day off." "Oh, well, yeah, sure," Maria said. "I'll be right there, Nick." She started packing before she even finished the call. 40 minutes later, Maria rushed to the cafe, confused in her own thoughts. Does he really want to fire me? With apprehension, she thought. I don't think so. He promised to make up for the day off. She walked inside, nodding her head to her coworkers. Passing Emily stopped the girl on the approach to the office of the boss. "Why are you here?" the waitress asked, surprised. "You have the day off today." "I don't know myself. Nick called me, said it was urgent. I don't know what to think. Why are you like this? Is something wrong with you?" Concerned, I asked Maria. "So you don't know yet?" Emily raised her eyebrows. Adriana was fired. That's what. Can you imagine? We're all on pins and needles today, just in shock. She's conspiratorial, lowered her voice. The girls are whispering, saying there's a terrible change coming. Seems our old man's out of his mind and wants to fire everyone. I think he's closing down his business. Or something like that, I don't know exactly, but there's definitely something going on. She grinned nervously. Well, we don't know that for sure. I'm afraid he's called you in to fire you too. The law says you have to give them 2 weeks' notice. Too bad we just became friends, she said in a high-pitched voice. All right, well, good luck. I'm off. In the meantime, she fluttered down like a frightened bird. Maria panicked. His knees shook, and his mouth instantly went dry. Having failed to regain at least a semblance of calm, she timidly knocked and entered the chief's office. "Nick, hello again." "Hello, Maria." He said it a little too sweetly. Surely now he will say that he is sorry, but he has to fire me. Maria's mind raced. She tried to restrain herself, but all the emotions were reflected on her sensual face. "You don't look so good today, do you? I must have pulled you out for nothing." "My bad," Nick said. He made her even more upset. "Here's what I wanted to do." He sighed. "Maria, tell me, do you like working?" Maria felt as if the ground had gone from under her feet. She turned even more pale and visibly nervous and replied, "Yes, very much. It's my best job. I am interested in the food service industry and me. I am just happy to work for you." The cafe owner smiled. "That's a good thing. But I guess you wouldn't want to work all your life as a waitress, right? There are other opportunities in life." Maria didn't know what to say to that. She was ready to fall to her knees, cry, do anything to keep him from firing her. No, I don't want to leave. Please, I'll work as long as I have to. Don't fire me." The girl blurted out in her heart and cried. The old man's thick gray eyebrows crept upward. "Maria, what are you saying?" "I didn't mean to." "What made you think that?" He rose from his seat. "All right, it doesn't matter. But don't cry, don't cry." He awkwardly stroked her shoulder. "Anyway, in a nutshell, Adriana doesn't work for us anymore. So I'm going to offer the position to you. How do you feel about that?" Maria pulled her tearful eyes out. I don't know what to say. She just couldn't believe what was happening to her simple waitress and the position. "I'm the manager." "Thank you. Of course I'm in. I mean, I'm so glad." She wanted to throw herself at the old man's neck, but she was just in time to be yanked out of the chain of command. "Oh, great." Chief, with a loud clap of his hands. "I know you're already aware of your future duties. I've seen you watching Adriana closely, flipping through magazines, trying to do many things for her when she's away, and all the other things you've done for my establishment. I'm very grateful. I can't talk pretty, though." "You're welcome. Let's go." And the old man grabbed her arm with determination. The whole team has been warned in advance by their boss. Already gathered in the kitchen of the cafe for such news, which he was about to tell his employees. He even told them to close the establishment for an hour. Unprecedented business. May I have everyone's attention, please? The chef has raised his hand in the air. I'd like to introduce you to our new manager. He paused for a moment. You all undoubtedly know this man well by now. He looked around at all his employees, including Maria, who stood modestly next to her colleagues. Maria, please. The host nodded to Maria with a gesture indicating that she should step forward. The waitresses, cooks, and bartenders looked at each other in amazement, and none of them could utter a word. Suddenly Molly, standing behind everyone, stepped forward. Congratulations, she said with a slight irony, looking at Maria, as if she were seeing her for the first time. We had no doubt you'd be the one to get the top job. Well, it's an interesting choice, especially considering that you've been working here for less than a week. Nick gave his ward a stern look. Molly, you're not happy with my decision. Yes and no. Nick, not the least bit embarrassed, she replied and looked fearlessly into the eyes of her boss. I hope you won't regret your choice. Then Emily gave her high-pitched voice. Maria, what a good girl you are. Congratulations. She smiled radiantly at her new boss, but in her voice you could hear unconcealed envy. And Maria smiled indignantly. Now her employees were already congratulating her. She answered them mechanically, but she did not feel any joy. She understood perfectly well now that she would have to replace Adriana, who had been fired. It would not get any easier. I think they all hate me now, she thought wistfully. And so the new position came out, adding Maria and new problems. Even those who used to be on good or neutral terms with her started treating her completely differently. She was definitely envied. There were murmurs behind her back. She was discussed behind her eyes. But no one said anything in the open. And what could they say? Maria had earned her position in a completely honest and correct way. And they had nothing to reproach her with. Now she had more work, but her salary became even higher, and she could afford something she had never dreamed of before. She could, but did not allow money, continued to save, dreaming of the time when she could put them in real business. Thus, everything went its way. On one of the most ordinary working days, Maria was finishing preparations for a big banquet. One of the local rich men had rented the whole cafe for the whole day, having decided to celebrate his girlfriend's birthday in a big way, so to speak. Maria prepared everything perfectly, as always. All the requirements of the customer were fulfilled, and now she was already sitting in her corner near the bar, watching from there how the planned banquet was going on. Well, rich people know how to party hard. She reasoned with mixed feelings, and had just reached for her cup of coffee, which was slowly being pulled up and in the process, when one of the newly hired new waitresses ran up to her. Maria, Pipsqueak, blurted out a young girl named Lida. Is that your name there? Why do you have to say that all the time? Maria wrinkled his nose. What else happened there? Lida guiltily lowered her eyes. I accidentally doused a client with champagne. Please forgive me, I really did, accidentally. Maria sighed heavily. Well, okay, I understand, but please be more careful from now on. Lida smiled gratefully. Thank you, Maria. I'll do my best. Maria counted to 3 and headed in the direction of the disgruntled customer. Figuring out who was who, the victim was quite easy. It turned out to be a young and very handsome man in a white shirt absolutely wet with champagne. His face was skewed by a disgruntled grimace, and his hair emphasized his dark and shiny eyes. Maria suddenly caught herself thinking that she liked him. She restrained herself. She found time and approached the young man. Good evening. I'm Maria's manager. We have already met when you ordered a banquet from us. You wanted to see me? The young man's stern look softened when he saw the manager, and Maria smiled broadly. Why don't you watch your waiters? Look what that girl has done. He spread his arms wide, pointing to a large wet champagne stain. Oh, if you'll excuse us. She's just had a nervous breakdown at work recently. The result. As a compliment, please accept a small gift from our establishment. Maria turned around and made a sign to the waitress behind her. And she, smiling dazzlingly, served a bottle of the best champagne in buckets with ice. Maria smiled too. We will replace the waiter, of course. The girl will be interviewed and punished accordingly. I guarantee it. The young man hummed in response. All right, have it your way. He leaned back in his chair with his hands behind his head. I'll have a new shirt delivered right away. In the meantime, let's go out in the yard for a smoke. There we'll discuss how to correct this oversight. He suddenly winked playfully at Maria. I do not smoke, but I would love to breathe fresh air with you. A couple of minutes. Maria smiled politely, reminding herself mentally that the customer is always right, especially the one who rents all establishments for an expensive party. Barely the young people were in the fresh air. The guy lazily and defiantly reached out to spread his arms in different directions. Once he, as a zealous horse, led wide nostrils, greedily gaining air into his lungs, and took out of his pants pocket an expensive cigarette case. Maria shuffled modestly from foot to foot. It was slightly awkward for her to watch him, being so close. She was the first to start the conversation. You wanted to talk about something, didn't you? Can I get you something else instead of champagne? The guy smoked a cigarette and exhaled a puff of smoke right in the girl's face from the clear smell. She was getting angry, and he laughed. Excuse me, Maria, but how about this option? I generously forgive you the ruined shirt, and you, in turn, go on a date with me. He waited, looked at the girl. Maria, on her cheek, became words of embarrassment. She lowered her eyes and kicked with the toe of her shoe. A tiny pebble lying nearby. Wait, you rented our cafe to celebrate your girlfriend's birthday, right? Didn't you? Your girlfriend's last words were deliberately emphasized. The guy laughed even harder and took a step in her direction. So what? He fixed a strand of her hair in a masterly manner. By the way, I liked you right away. Of course I remembered you. Maria was visibly nervous. She tried to find the right words, but he beat her to it. So, lowering his deep velvet voice, he took her hand in his large warm palm. You're going to be my girlfriend. Turning Maria's pink palm, he kissed her dusty one lightly on the side, while looking intently into Maria's eyes. And here are Maria melted like ice cream taken out of the freezer and forgotten in the kitchen. Even when ordering the banquet, she noted the attractive beauty of this guy, his brutal masculinity. Rough and risky, but very attractive features of his tanned face. Maria seemed to float on the wave of her feeling. In a flash, he pulled himself back and mentally scolded himself for such nasty thoughts. His girlfriend is the one she's waiting for. It's her birthday today, and I'm disgusted with myself. She took a step back and said confidently, no, you can't do that. After all, you already have a girlfriend, don't you? The guy raised his eyebrows in surprise. So what? She will understand everything perfectly well for her. Don't worry. He held out his hand to Maria on Italy. And I understand you already have a boyfriend. Or are you married at all? That's not an obstacle either, by the way. He stared into her eyes again, and then suddenly pulled her to him and gave her a long, demanding kiss on the lips. Maria felt the ground fall away from under her feet. The last time she had experienced such a pinching feeling was a long time ago. She had been about 16 then. She made an effort to pull away from her vis-a-vis. Lori, you're wasting it. She stammered, unable to find what else to say to him. But after a short interval, added almost with despair, it's just all wrong. Lori hummed, pushing the corners of his lips down. Grinning, he looked at Maria with a new appraising gaze. Look, have you ever even had a boyfriend? Maria was embarrassed. Well, no, she was especially embarrassed for the rule of taking her hair behind her ear. Why? Lori's eyes rounded in amazement. He seemed to be in complete shock. Are you serious? I mean, never ever. In every sense. Maria, unable to contain her smile, giggled softly. Yes, you got it right. Never. In every sense. Well, you give Maroos. The young man whistled. All right, I'll forgive you. I mean for the ruined shirt. He squeezed the cigarette butt between his index finger and thumb and deftly thumbed it forward into the darkness. A jerk. Olenka's waiting for me. He smiled again, showing perfectly straight white teeth, and disappeared behind the doors. Left alone, Maria took a deep breath, gathering her courage to return to the banquet hall. When she stepped inside, she found Lori already cradling the birthday girl to his chest. Maria was pricked by some new feeling she had never experienced before. Was it jealousy? She began to berate herself again in her own thoughts. Fool. What a fool you are. Suddenly, the ubiquitous Emily appeared from behind. Who's handsome? And he's loaded. Too bad he's busy. Dreamily said the waitress. Maria jumped on the spot from surprise. Emily, why scare her like that? Emily, ignoring the question, continued to admire Lori. No, look at him. Not a man, but a dream. Oh, do you know who he is? No, who is he? Maria inquired. He's the son of one of our deputies. He's terribly rich. He seems to be out of politics, but he has a lot of money. She rolled her eyes in delight. Oh, come on, he's just some idiot. Maria suddenly blurted out. Intrigued by her friend's new look, she, without waiting for her to ask a logical question, told her what had just happened in the courtyard. And I whistled in annoyance. You're so full of it. You've gone off the deep end, haven't you? I should have said yes. No way. Maria said yes. She turned around and headed towards the kitchen. Emily from behind the family followed her, making her endless judgments. Since the day of that ill-fated banquet, several days passed, and Maria finally had a chance to take that extra day off, which the chief had offered her the day he pulled her off the couch by appointing her manager. That time, Maria decided not to lie around, to do a lot of things that had been piling up for a long time. Maria, hi. How was your weekend? On the first day of the week, she was immediately greeted by Nick. Hello, I'm fine, thank you. Went to the news store. What did they open? I just bought my cat a new house. She's got a big smile on her face, spreading her arms wide. It's huge, and it cost more than my apartment. The girl laughed resoundingly. Nick laughed back of those cats. I have a kitty at home too. Butterscotch is so cool. It's horrible. And what is the name of your cat, Barsick? Maria smiled. I found him a few years ago at the store, all sick and beggarly. It hurts to remember. The desire to help a poor stray is very commendable. I'm glad my manager has such a bright soul. I never doubted it. Maria was embarrassed by the compliment. She was even a little embarrassed. Why did her boss praise her so much? She all tensed up, preparing for what is about to say old man. For instance, remember when Molly asked you to fill in for her? I remember, it was a few weeks ago, the girl answered. I can literally feel it in my bones. Okay, but first of all, you're not a waitress anymore. You shouldn't be filling in for waiters, you know. Of course not. But her sister was sick at the time. I couldn't fill in for her. I couldn't help Molly out. She needed to support her sister. Nick laughed sadly dearly. Dinah doesn't have any sister. And there was another incident. Not too long ago, she sent some friends of hers on your shift. You literally worked the last week before your new assignment. Yes, the old man moved his lips to calculate the date and nodded his head, confirming his thoughts. Well, they came to me personally and praised you, calling you a terrible worker. Well, I know you're not. And I've seen these guys in the company of these guys. More than once, Molly realized they were acquaintances of hers. You see where I'm going with this? Maria raised her head, trying to push away the tears, and quietly replied, I see. I am too trusting sullenly, she summarized. Yes, nodded the old man. But it's not bad at all, and you are not to blame just in our collective. And in general in life, you have to be a little tougher, even more cynical, you know? People, unfortunately, most of them are not as soft and fluffy as we would like them to be. Anyway, just be on your guard, sweetie. I will. Maria smiled gratefully at her boss. I got it. I'll do my best. Thank you for the advice. Well, I'll be off. I have a lot of work to do, of course. Go on. The old man sat down at his desk again, pulling out some papers from his drawers. Maria went out into the hall and almost crashed into the elite. A young waitress ran with all her legs. Maria, I'm just looking for the goalkeeper panting and the girl there asking for you go quickly. Who? Maria asked with a sigh, suspecting that again came disgruntled visitors, but she followed Lida's gaze and marveled next to the bar stood Lori himself and smiled at her with a full mouth and held a lush bouquet of scarlet roses. Noticing the girl's gaze, he waved to her. "Maria, how glad I am to see you." Theatrically, he said and bowed slightly, standing next to her. Lyda jumped a little on the spot. Unable to hide her emotions, she quietly, "Maria, how lucky are you? How do I envy you? I'm at work for everyone." Maria suddenly barked at her Maria and the impressionable Lyda. Dumbfounded, she had never heard the always kind and helpful manager snapped at her like that before. Lori from Bolivia laughed when he saw the scene, and then came closer and held out a bouquet to Maria. "And this is for you. We can talk." Maria preferred to retreat again to the patio away from prying eyes and ears, and nodded to him in agreement. Outside, Lori was at it again. "Well, he switched from heels to toes, and I broke up with Alina. He broke the big news. Now you're ready to go out with me. What do you mean you broke up? Is that because of me?" Maria looked at the guy with such hope that he couldn't help smiling. Who else would Queen Victoria be for? You, of course. So you're ready to go on a date with me? Maria repeated his words, running my mind over my prospects. Lori is richly handsome, successful, and really likes her. Isn't that a real fairy tale? She feverishly pondered over the information she had received. He broke up with her because of me. It's just like in the novels. She smiled at her own thoughts, but another, more down-to-earth one immediately popped into her head. If he broke up with her so easily, with that glamorous beauty, won't he break up with me just as easily? Joyful light immediately went out in Maria's green eyes, which did not go unnoticed by Lori. "Maria, why do you even want to?" He was genuinely surprised. "Well, I don't even know. It was so sudden and quick," she answered, and in her mind recalled the recent dialogue with her boss, "Always be on guard." She remembered Nick's words that the guy laughed, showing off his dazzling teeth quickly. "How did you want it to be? When is it okay to ask you out on a date? After a year of dating? Oh, stop it already. It's just a meeting. A walk. Call it what you want. If you don't like it, just walk away." Here Maria, though doubting the rightness of her choice, gave up. Feelings and emotions outweighed. After all, this man was so beautiful and so attractive, and reason can wait. After all, she wouldn't have to live alone forever. She gave him a flirtatious smile and nodded. "All right then." Lori smiled victoriously. "Great. What time do you finish everything? I'll pick you up. Ciao." He gave her a casual peck on the cheek, waved, and left. She didn't have time to dress up properly, so she quickly ordered from the marketplace the first dress that caught her eye. And in an hour, the courier brought a couple of sizes to choose from. Arriving by 7 o'clock, Lori whistled and raised one eyebrow when he saw her in the outfit. You look shocked. Maria smiled and blushed lol at the compliment she received. She was very pleased with his praise. Lori sat her on the front passenger seat of his luxurious sports car, closed the door, and himself literally jumped behind the wheel. The car made a noise like a beast, and in 1 second took off from the place. Maria literally squeezed into the back of the seat. Well, as a satisfied Lori looked at her slightly mockingly. She didn't. "No, it's fine," Maria assured him. But all she could think about at that moment was how they could avoid an accident at such a breakneck speed. Lori hummed contentedly and gave the car a little more gas. How did they get to the restaurant? She remembered very vaguely. In the dense traffic, his low car was maneuvering, so that the lights of street lamps and headlights of oncoming cars merged before her eyes into glittering ribbons. At one point, she even covered her eyes so that she couldn't see at all. But Lori didn't care, and now he was opening the car door for her. "Get out. What are you sitting there for?" Maria gave him her cold, thin hand and awkwardly stepped out of the car. Is she really across town by the bay? Oh, there's that expensive, famous restaurant. Oh, come on. Her head was spinning and her legs were showing. If he always drives like that, and she wouldn't go with him again. But Lori took her exclamation as a compliment and literally inflated himself with pride. Although Maggiana beast of a driver laughter, but he and let her, taking her under the arm on the marble slippery steps. It turned out to be simply gorgeous inside. They went up to the second floor lounge, which had a marvelous view of the bay and the lights of the evening city. The privacy and the table by the window was served with such skill that Maria admired the art of the staff working here and began to look at every detail to memorize and try to do the same in their cafe. Of course, she and the chef could not reach such a level. It requires huge investments, but some things can be repeated. "Where are you flying, Maria? What are you ordering?" Lori's voice brought her back to reality. A smiling schoolgirl waitress in a beautiful uniform with the establishment's logo was already standing next to her. "I recommend our chef's specialty. What's your shampoo? Let's start with the fire." Lori reclined in a soft armchair and smiled indulgently. "Well, perhaps bring us my plan. And if there is, of course," said Maria politely, having studied the map and Godfather wines, of course, right away. The waitress nodded. "An excellent choice to start a romantic evening. And you're quite a good judge." Lori smiled approvingly. "I didn't expect that. It's my job," Maria answered him modestly, "sitting here in this posh room." She still couldn't believe that such a man had paid attention to her, a simple girl who had grown up in an orphanage, a girl with no education, no glamorous gloss, no model looks. She had always tended to underestimate herself from time to time, even slowly exhausted her self-lock ear. When Lori did not see to make sure that everything happening to her was not a wonderful and marvelous dream, that everything was real. And here she is, yesterday's orphanage graduate, a girl who's a nobody, sitting here in a fancy, expensive dress in front of the man of her dreams. How can you believe that? And Lori wiped his lips with a napkin. "How was dinner? Did you enjoy it?" "Yes," Maria smiled very much. "Thank you for this evening. I have to admit, honestly, this is my first real date." "Oh, come on." Lori laughed quietly, shaking his head. "And where did you come from?" "Maria?" The girl only shrugged enigmatically. She wasn't going to tell him everything about herself at once. Lori gestured to the waitress to bring the bill. "So what are our plans next? Are we going to my place or to a hotel?" Maria turned pale and was not on a joke afraid that no. Lori grinned predatorily somehow. "No, what's wrong again?" Without looking at the bill, he brought the phone to the portable payment terminal and carelessly threw a couple of withdrawn bills on the table as a tip. "Maria, how stupid is that? I've already broken up with my girlfriend, like you wanted. What more do you want?" Maria got up from the table after him. "I don't want anything. I won't sleep with a man until I'm married. It's my principle, if you will. And I won't cheat on him." She took a small black loaf in her hands and already headed for the exit from the restaurant. But Lori caught up with her in 2 jumps and pulled her sharply to him. "What are you doing, silly?" He kissed her neck and ran his hand down her smooth and open back. "Don't be silly. Let's go. I'm not going to hurt you." Everything inside Maria turned upside down, too, from his closeness, his scent, and his hot breath. But she found the strength to pull the insolent man's hands away from her. "No, Lori, I'm not going anywhere." "I'm sorry to waste your time," she pondered, searching for the right words. "Please understand, I just can't. Besides, I have a cat at home alone." She threw one last belittling glance at the young man and literally ran downstairs to duck through the saving door of the women's restroom. Here she took a breath, refreshed, and ordered a cab. Puzzled, Lori remained standing by the stairs. "So she has the cat all to herself," he hummed and suddenly laughed loudly. Maria returned home, flooding and bitter tears. She was in pain, hurt that Lori had mistaken her for such an available doormat. She threw off her annoying, stiff shoes and was in her bed in a flash, burying her face in her pillow. All morning she'd been tearing up all morning, choking on resentment, not giving her time to recover. She grabbed herself by the hair. "What's wrong with me?" She really didn't understand why Lori was acting this way at the master's cries muffled by the pillow. A concerned Mars came over, pulled in next to her, and snuggled his muzzle against her cheek and fell silent. "You're the only one who loves me." "Maria." Wiping away her tears, the girl said. She fell asleep in a luxurious dress in the arms of her favorite cat. The next day, intrigued and friends, time and again asked Maria how her date went. Natalia waved off their annoying queries. She had not the slightest desire to discuss Lori, especially since he never showed up again. And he hadn't even called back to see how she'd gotten home. It wasn't love. I summarized the results of the failed date. Maria, and forbade herself to even think about this rich bastard. In recent days, Maria spent more and more time with the chief. He paid a lot of attention to the training of his new manager. They also drank coffee together, tasting new dishes to decide whether to introduce them to the menu or not. Just chatting, discussing their favorites, strategizing about advertising and other working points. Today, Maria was coloring in Nick's colors about her next idea. Suddenly, there was an insistent knock on the office door, and without waiting for an answer, Emily unceremoniously stuck her pretty face in the open door. Maria stretched out the waitress, trying to observe business etiquette. "It's like that in there. You won't believe it." She couldn't stand it. She habitually switched to the first name. What? What happened?" The manager got up from her seat. "What happened again?" "I'm worried." "There's your boyfriend again." She giggled happily and said that yes, go and see for yourself. From impatience, she has already completely leaked into the office of the chief and pulled Maria. "The girls and I are shocked. You do not even think to not be a fool and better agree." Considered all the way up the stairs as a waitress who understands nothing, Maria. "Jan, stop please," she begged at last. "What should I agree with?" "Oh, now you'll see for yourself," delightedly giggled Emily and literally pushed her into the hall. Seeing what was happening there, Maria involuntarily shrieked quietly in the middle of the room. Lori stood there in a light-colored suit without embarrassing the numerous customers. Next to him was a huge basket filled with an unimaginable variety of flowers. Behind, along one of the walls, was a small orchestra. Seeing Maria, Lori waved his hand and the musicians played an enchanting melody, and he went up to her and got down on one knee. In his outstretched hand was a red velvet box. "Maria, my dear, I thought about what you said. You are absolutely right that someone like you cannot be taken lightly, so I've made a decision." In one fell swoop, he opened the box and inside glittered a ring with an impressive stone. "Will you marry me?" Sneakily, he asked. Maria froze like an ancient statue, or an enchanted princess from a fairy tale, on whom an evil sorceress has cast her terrible spell. Almost all of the available staff had already piled around, and even some of the visitors from the kitchen were interestedly peeking in, the technicians and cooks. All of them were hungry for more than just bread and spectacle. The people froze, just like Maria herself, waiting for her answer. "Maya, I don't know. I'll wait now, please." She suddenly blurted out and rashly rushed back up the stairs. "Nick." In desperation, screamed Maria, burst into the familiar office. "Nick, you're the only one. Can you help me now?" "What the hell happened?" My God, my God." The owner was alarmed and got out from behind the desk. "What is it?" He put a trembling arm around the girl's shoulders and gazed into her face. "What's the matter with you?" "He brought the ring," Maria said in a trembling voice. "Who is this rich bastard?" "Yes, he proposed to me." "Now he's still waiting there. Please, I beg you, tell me, what should I do?" "I have no one else." And Maria burst into tears, burying her face in the old man's shoulder. "Come on, my little girl. I'm touched." The chief stroked her head with his rough palm and coaxed her. "You did right to come for advice, didn't you? I've lived my life, I've seen a lot. I can see right through people like that Lori of yours." He lifted her face by the chin. "You shouldn't agree," he said firmly and frowned his bones and eyebrows. "Otherwise, you might regret it bitterly later." Changed beyond recognition. He spoke with such trepidation in his voice, with such evidently audible and sadness, as if he were instructing his own child. "Now go and take your fate in your hands and think hard about your decision. Don't chop off your shoulder," he told her lastly. Maria felt dizzy and her eyes darkened. For a second, it seemed to her that two different beings were sitting on either side of her shoulders, each whispering advice to her. One of them was saying, "Of course, go for it, you fool. Such a chance falls once in a lifetime to let you go, and you'll never meet such a man again." And the other soberly said, "Do not jump into the maelstrom with his head. If he really loves you, he will understand everything and wait until you are ready." And here she stands again, in front of him, already visibly nervous. What did she present? He laughed, trying to hide his disappointment after her flight. So what do you say to me, darling, I love you and I want you to be my wife? What else do I have to do to get you to say yes? I said it quietly. I think she saw with her eyes. The hall, frozen in anticipation. Then she looked into Lori's eyes. In them she saw what she wanted to see. Boundless love, expectation, hope. Of course I agree, said someone suddenly, as if from beside her, as if in her place. And she herself had not yet had time to realize anything, as all around shouted yay. Bitter. And a small orchestra played some bravura music. The hall simply exploded with applause. Visitors and employees smiled and congratulated the lovers. And already she has a huge ring on her finger. Lori hugs her by the shoulders, kisses her on the lips in front of everyone, and only crashed into memory unpleasant dissonance. A maliciously unpleasant stare, a day apart from that first kiss that happened on the patio. That public kiss and the shocking engagement that followed was only the third in her life. The very first. It had happened as a teenager in Maria's native orphanage. Mike, her young lover, was a peer and classmate of the girls. When did they realize they liked each other? They were both 16 years old. Teenagers were shy for a long time. But one day burning interest and sincere feelings outweighed, and hiding somewhere in the background, the guys kissed for the first time. And then their relationship failed to fully develop. Mike left the orphanage a couple weeks after that kiss. Unlike Maria, the guy had parents, but at some point they were deprived of parental rights. And it was in that period of time when lonely and vulnerable Maria found, as it seemed to her, her man in this world. Mike was taken from the orphanage by some distant relatives, having formalized the guardianship more. Maria had never heard anything about her lover. So Lori was not her first love in the classic sense of the term. But he managed somehow to find a sensitive string in her soul kissing him. As far as she was able to analyze it, already being alone with herself, it couldn't compare to that kiss from her distant youth, but it was more confident and mature. He was a real man, the kind of man she would be like a stone wall behind. At least that's how it seemed to her. And then, in the cafe, after that unforgettable scene with the proposal and the ring, Lori suddenly pulled out some papers. Look, he said proudly. I knew you'd say yes. So I took the liberty and already prepared the documents for our marriage. All you have to do is to sign. The rest is up to me. He lowered his voice. You see, I've used my connections, and we won't have to wait. We can get married tomorrow. Well, what kind of wedding do you want? Maria's hands shook. She scrutinized the groom so quickly. What for? We hardly know each other. Why are you in such a hurry? Lori frowned unhappily. I'm in a hurry. You're doing it again. I love you and I want you to be my wife. Is that a bad thing? He lowered his head, eliminating his gaze to the perfect, patent leather shoes. Well, you know, if it's a rush for you, you might as well say no. I thought you loved me too, and you don't. Sharp shouted Maria. She was immediately embarrassed by her excessive emotionality. I looked at her with attentive and sad eyes. Nick looked at her, standing in the corner of the hall. She turned back to her lover. I mean, I love you too. I just didn't expect it to be like this. The guy smiled again. What do you mean, sweetheart? I'm trying especially for you. He shoved the paper into the girl's hands and took out a gold-plated Parker from his pocket. Go ahead, sign it. Maria frowned slightly. Read the document. Lori was not deceived. It was indeed an application for the registry office. She carefully studied everything written. Then she asked in surprise, how did you get all my information? Lori winked cheerfully at the girl. The power of love. Maria smiled weakly at him. She had already put her hand to sign, but something stopped her. The girl thought about it, and the recent words of the boss came to her mind again. She twirled the pen in her hands. And yet he signed it. This is fate. This is true love. She convinced herself, chasing away the tedium and thought. Lori seemed to melt. I love you. He shouted out again, drawing the attention of those around him. But I have to go now. He folded the signed sheet neatly into a folder. I'm going to do the paperwork right now. And you know what I propose to celebrate our wedding right here. How does that sound? He spread his arms out like he wanted to cover the whole small room. "What do you think?" Maria smiled gently. "Let's make the arrangements then. And from me, the payment and everything else." He hugged the girl one last time and disappeared through the doors of the cafe. Nick came to Maria immediately. He had a look of concern on his face. "Maria, what did you just sign?" "Anxious?" asked the old man. "It's an application to the registry office. Very soon we will get married." Trying to make her voice proud, the girl replied. Nick frowned even more, and his eyebrows, judging by the expression on his face, it would seem that something terrible had happened. He dragged Maria to his office and said to Maria sternly, "What if it's not for the registry office? What if he cheats you? Steal it? What if he uses your signature and takes over the loan?" Maria laughed. "Nick, what loan? You know Lori comes from the richest family in our town. And I'm begging you, what is there to steal from me?" "Well, think about it." The old man squinted. "You can steal from a man without even taking a single dollar from him. I hope you don't have to face that." Oh, with a gesture he signaled that their conversation was over. Maria thanked him politely and left with a slight shrug. And he wondered. Indeed, he knew the Lori family well. These people had never needed money in their lives. On the contrary, they were so rich that they could afford almost anything. But still, something was definitely amiss. But what was it? Soon Maria was drowning in the hustle and bustle of the wedding, forgetting everything. She carefully picked out everything that even indirectly related to this wedding, her wedding. She couldn't quite believe how lucky she was to have Lori, and she had been picky about the flowers. She sat for hours studying the festive menu and even the color of the napkins. Maria agonized for several long and tedious hours. She wanted everything to be beautiful, unforgettable, perfect. Although the guest list was quite modest, it was mostly Lori's friends. Maria didn't have anyone to invite. The main guest of the girl was her boss, Nick. Obviously, he was not delighted with this wedding, but of course he did not refuse the invitation. Maria endlessly respected and even loved this hot old man. After all, it was he who gave the girl everything she had now. After all, it was thanks to him that Maria met her future husband. A few days before the wedding, another unpleasant circumstance came to light. The parents of the groom will not be able to come to the wedding because he is away abroad and they have some urgent business there. Maria, of course, was upset by the news, but did not let it show. Besides, Lori promised her a family feast after the honeymoon. "Trust me, baby, you won't lose much by not seeing my old people at the registry office." On the big day itself, Maria expected another surprise Lori arranged so that the registry office and the registrar is solid. Solemn Lady came to them herself, and the whole wedding took place within the walls of the cafe. It turns out that this service is called off-site registration. Maria quickly looked on the internet. Really exists such a thing. As for her herself, she prepared everything just fine. The hall was decorated with white and lilac flowers. The main color of the holiday she chose lavender. Having decorated everything in delicate bed colors, Lori's friends turned out to be expectedly peculiar. All as one were incredibly glamorous and rich and powerful people. They peered at the cafe meticulously, but apparently out of politeness, without saying a single word, but their gazes were definitely filled with dislike and arrogance. Maria tried not to pay attention to such trifles. Nothing on this day could spoil her joy and happiness. Even the disgruntled looks of the groom's guests, waitresses, and banquet attendants were divided into two camps. Some were happy for Maria, cheering her up and complimenting her gorgeous, white dress and great hairstyle. Others never managed to hide either their dislike or their obvious envy. From Maria's side, as bridesmaids acted Emily and Lita on the ruffled condi dresses. And when the newlyweds exchanged rings, even the most disgruntled could not hide their joyful smiles. And Nick himself did not hold back a single tear. He saw how happy Maria was. Saw with what awe and with what love her newfound husband treated her. I must have been wrong. The cafe owner thought to himself, love catches up with people sometimes in the most unexpected places. And isn't my Maria the most beautiful girl in this world? Right after the newlyweds' dance, a tall and statuesque girl approached them. She looked to be about 30. She was dressed in a gorgeous black silk dress. Her lustrous hair was beautifully scattered down her back. "Lori, can I talk to you for a moment?" "Why?" With a smirk, asked the guy without releasing his young spouse from his embrace. "Put it this way, I have nothing to hide from my wife." And he laughed merrily, looking Maria in the eyes. Maria was embarrassed. "Well, if it's something important." "No," said Lori. The girl who approached them pressed her lips together with a long and attentive look, looked into his eyes, and then said, "Okay, I will tell Lori. Please, think properly about your married life." She chose her words carefully, and Maria realized that there was nothing this pretty girl could say directly. "You know, living people are not toys that can be used and thrown away for uselessness." She finished mysteriously, shook her head, and walked away. Maria was wary, but Lori laughed merrily. "She's just jealous, chasing after me, and you and I have to go to the hotel." He looked at her with a look that was bashful and modest. "What about the guests?" almost pitifully asked Maria. "What about the guests?" objected the man. "They are having fun without us, and they are waiting for us." He whispered something in her ear, and Maria giggled shamefully, lowering her eyes into the bright sun. And Maria wanted to jump up immediately. After all, the first thought that came to her mind was about work, and that she had overslept. But immediately she remembered yesterday's wedding, then last night. Without opening her eyes, she smiled, sweetly stretched, and found no one around. Alarmed, Maria climbed up on the bed, looking around. Lori was nowhere to be found. She looked the room, quietly called to her favorite, but there was no answer. Then she carefully got up, returned to the sheet, and went in search of her husband. For the room was simply huge, but in the living room and in the bathroom he was not there either. The young wife's heart was pricked by some unpleasant feeling, a hunch. But Maria quickly dismissed the silly suspicion, thinking that Lori might well have gone away, for example, for work. As it was, on the coffee table she noticed a small leaf, and on it was written her favorite. "Good morning to me. Urgent to leave. Important business. I'll meet you later at lunchtime at your cafe. Love kisses all your." You know, she read the note and smiled at the memory, and blushed again. At the cafe, her appearance created quite a sensation. Everyone congratulated her again. The girls giggled and asked questions, and Molly was the only one who asked coldly, "Why isn't she in the Maldives yet?" Maria answered her with a contemptuous smile and promised herself to fire the bitch at the first opportunity. Then she checked her current affairs, drank coffee, and couldn't find anything else to do. Today, she was being replaced by Emily, whom she had been grooming for the position of her deputy for a long time. After all, life as a married woman involves all sorts of unexpected twists and turns. Maria smiled again at her thoughts. Yes, she was definitely ready for any twists and turns. And this joyful feeling gave her new hope. Toward lunchtime, Maria began to worry. Lori still hadn't written anything. She was too shy to write or call, in case she distracted him from important matters. Several hours passed, and when the sun began to sink, Maria began to panic. Lori still hadn't shown up. Maybe something had happened to him. Nervous, she tried to call her husband, but he didn't answer the incoming call. The young wife's hands were shaking with fear for her spouse, and in her thoughts various horrors began to loom. Then the front door of the cafe opened abruptly. Lori appeared in the doorway, surrounded by a group of his friends. Maria was happy. "Jesus, where have you been?" "You're all right." She rushed toward him, but stopped abruptly halfway. Standing next to him on his right hand was the very girl he had dated before Maria. It was her birthday that the company of rich men had celebrated at this cafe. It was at her birthday party that Maria had met Lori. She froze in place, trying to figure out what it all meant. The rarefied company didn't seem the least bit complex. Quickly seated at a vacant table, it looked like all of them, including Lori, were already tipsy. The former Lori asked Maria with a chuckle, "Well, young ear, would you like to offer your husband's guests a table?" and laughed loudly, tipping her head back. Lori laughed with her. Maria was shocked. Again, all eyes were on her. But now a burning sense of shame flooded the purple color, her face. But she overpowered herself and came closer. "Darling, what is the meaning of all this?" She tried to take his hand, but he yanked it away and smirked. "It means that you, Marusha, are an idiot." He said those cruel words as loudly as possible. The people around them fell silent for a moment, listening to the conversation between the newly married couple. "Which means I've got a bet on you," he shouted again. "Lori, stop it. What are you saying?" Maria replied in tears. "Let's get out of here. Let's talk in private." "No, let everyone know what a knave fool you are." And the guy volleyed in a glass of whiskey and went to the center of the hall. "Listen up, everybody," he yelled, smirking. "And I bet a tidy sum that I could put this one down. Didn't touch it in bed." In a drunken frenzy, he broadcast to the crowd. "Have you ever seen a nun like her? You'd be hard-pressed to find one. I lied to her about breaking up with my girlfriend, and she wouldn't let it go. I took her to puppies, expensive restaurants. I had to cheat anyway. I forged documents and everything so that the stupid orphan would think that I really married her. Of course, that wedding was a farce of a fake. There's no way I'm marrying someone like you. A practical joke. What did you imagine?" He gave Maria a scornful look. "I'm not going to get married at all. I just had to win that bet. That's all. And now you've served us like a restaurant's doormat. Because you are a doormat now. Imagination sucks. Come on," he insisted, coming almost right up to me. "Come on. Or have you forgotten how you did it last night?" Smiled, looking unhappy straight in the eyes, and she was already shaking all over and tears appeared in the corners of her eyes. She opened her mouth to answer, as suddenly there was some kind of a clap, and all the visitors in a panic began to scatter. Where to? Leaving their belongings lying unattended. In the center of the hall was suddenly Nick himself, and he had a hunting okut in his hands. Lori's company, momentarily oblivious to the fun, poured out of the room in the front rows, abandoning their leader, subordinates hiding in corners. In a few minutes, only Lori and Maria remained in the center of the room. After the first shot in the air, he hissed, turning to Lori immediately and apologized to the girl. He pointed the barrel of the gun directly at him and apologized. "And yes, you will marry her," firmly said the old man. Lori laughed loudly, throwing his head up, but there was fear in his eyes, although the guy did his best not to show it. Maria slowly approached the old man, reading in his ear, he's not worth it." The chief did not answer her anything, only impatiently drove his shoulder in fear of her hand, and did not lower the gun. "Where are you? Are you out of your mind? Fuck you, you Marasmus." He spat under Nick's feet. "I'm not marrying your chicken and fuck off. I'm all the way out of your nut house." He made a move to leave, but the stern voice stopped him again and apologized to her. "And fuck you," shouted back the frightened Lori. "Shoot, you weakling, shoot, and then my parents will do this to you." But Lori didn't get a chance to speak. Another shot rang out. Nick was aiming at the floor next to the bastard's legs, but accidentally hit one of his limbs. The downed young man howled in pain. Maria howled in terror. The cafe workers ran out of their hiding places. Nick slowly approached the guy lying on the floor. "You apologize and marry her," he repeated stiffly. He looked around at his staff and tossed carelessly. "Call an ambulance for this scumbag." The old man spat at Lori and disappeared through the door of his office, leaving everyone completely bewildered. Maria rushed after him. "Nick," Maria ran into the office, falling to her knees in front of the old man. "Thank you. Thank you for standing up for me. But what happens now? What's gonna happen? You'll go to jail, won't you?" In tears, she screamed. The old man lifted the girl up, sitting her down on a table nearby. "Come on. Don't cry," he said, stroking her head. Against this advice, Maria burst into tears with renewed vigor. She felt humiliated, destroyed, trampled into dust, wide patent shoes, scum, rich. Besides, she was also guilty. She had framed the only person who had treated her sympathetically, who had accepted her and given her a ticket to a normal life. Finally, Maria looked up at the old man with her eyes swollen with tears. "Forgive me." Quietly, she stretched out. forgive you. You need to get away immediately. You know he has very powerful parents. You must leave immediately," she said firmly. "Calm down, it's not your fault," calmly replied the old man. "And nothing terrible will happen to me, I assure you." He lifted himself up, leaving Maria sitting on the table, poured her a glass of water from the bolero he had in his office, and continued talking to Maria. "I know his parents really well. These people are quite decent. Believe me, if they found out what happened, they would take your side. But if I do go to jail, well, that's my fate. I don't regret what I did," the old man concluded. They're in tears. Maria thought for a moment. She slowly drank the water and said firmly, "I think I know what we should do." 3 weeks had passed since the horrifying incident, and still nothing was known about Gloria. Thinking over everything that had happened, Maria caught herself an angry and even dangerous thought. She realized that she wished Lori were dead. Realizing this, she became seriously afraid for herself. To wish a man dead, how did I get to this point? She thought with horror, unable to banish these demonic thoughts from her head. Time passed, but so far no cure. Contrary to popular saying, but in this short time, once naive good Maria became a completely different person. What had happened had made her older and wiser. Sometimes it seemed to her that she was like a phoenix bird, burned to the ground, and rose again from the ashes. One day she finally decided to act. Eve noticed that she would be late in the morning and went to the police station. The officer on duty greeted her blankly. He was sitting at a small desk with his head bent over some papers. "Please have a seat. I am a junior sergeant of the Internal Service, Michael. What's your question?" He raised his head, and Maria cried out in amazement. Mike, is it really you?" And the young sergeant, as it turned out, had forgotten how to breathe. With widened eyes, he stared in amazement at his visitor. "Maria, I can't believe my eyes. How beautiful you have become." Maria smiled weakly, involuntarily embarrassed, and averted her gaze before her sat her Mike. Her first and probably only true love. The last time they had seen each other was many years ago, the day when he was still a teenager leaving the walls of the orphanage. Since that day, she had often thought of him very often. "You're an investigator now." "Yes," such a young guy smiled broadly. "Well, almost. I'm still an assistant. I'm a fast learner. My superiors praise me. They say I'm gonna do great." He took a breath and stopped talking. "What about you? I'm a fool to be crucified. Something happened to you, didn't it? Come on, tell me." By the end of her mournful tale, he was shouting in a rage that didn't hide his anger. "I'll kill that asshole." Maria waved her head. No, calm down, please. He's not worth it." Eventually, after consulting with senior colleagues, they prepared a statement accusing him of fraud and rape. "Maria," Michael gently touched her arm. "I realize you're having a hard time right now, but maybe we can go out with you somewhere." But Maria pulled her hand, and tears came to her eyes again. "No, I can't yet. I'm sorry." Lori limped out of the cab. Maria had called him a couple of hours ago and asked for an urgent meeting, without giving the exact reasons. The guy was at first taken aback by such impudence, but after thinking about it, he decided to meet. He immediately called his friends, inviting them to go together to mock this bearded beard. He cheered them up, but most of the warm company of majors did not want to get involved in the story again. In the end, only 2 people wanted to go with Lori: his girlfriend Helen and a buddy named Jacob. Helen helped the guy out of the car, holding him by the elbow. His leg was still in a cast. Jacob was shy in the bright sun, standing already near the door of the cafe. Lori hesitated, looking at his girlfriend. "Why do you forgive me everything?" He mentally asked this question to himself when the door to the cafe opened. Lori prepared to shout some nasty remark about his fictitious wife, but froze in place in the hall in the company of Maria and that fictitious old man who had almost shot him, sat his own parents. "There you are," the boy's mother looked at him menacingly. "Sit down." She pointed him to the seat beside her like a schoolboy in a Skoda. Lori slowly lowered himself into the seats offered to him. He turned around. Helen and Jacob were already gone. He swallowed hard, realizing that his parents would not approve of his behavior. Maria was the first to speak up. "Look," she nonchalantly slid Lori a piece of paper. He took a quick look at the paperwork and was stunned. It was a summons to the police, with a copy of Maria's statement attached. He looked at his parents. "It's not my fault. None of this is true," shouted he, excusing himself. "Shut your mouth," bellowed the boy's father, hitherto silent lice. "Listen to what she has to say." Maria firmly pronounced, "If you don't fulfill what I demand, I won't take back my application. You'll go to jail for fraud and rape." She paused for a long moment. "I hope you're aware of how rapists are treated in prison. Parents are not going to help you, as you already realize." The girl looked at the elderly couple. They nodded synchronously. Maria continued, "But you have one more option. I can take back my application, but only on condition that you marry me. I'm expecting a child from you." She looked at everyone present and summarized the choice for you. Lori was sullenly silent. The news that he would soon be a father did not add to his enthusiasm. Finally, he looked up. "Ah, so you're all in cahoots." "I see. Then I'll sue you." He put his foot forward. "Do you think attempted murder with a firearm carries the same sentence?" He looked menacingly at Molchanov Nick, but he did not answer him with anything but a contemptuous look. Maria rose from the table and threw Lori carelessly. "Don't think." She left the room without waiting for him to respond, knowing full well that Lori had been out of options a couple days ago. Thanks to Nick, she had managed to contact Lori's parents and told him about their son's behavior. The couple was shocked to hear what they had heard. After learning about the girl's pregnancy, they began to talk her into a real marriage. Maria agreed. She did not want her child to grow up fatherless. Lori's parents promised to deal with their own offspring. When they found out Nick had shot their son, they weren't even particularly angry. After all, Lori had no excuse for what he'd done. 4 years passed. Maria carried and gave birth to a healthy and strong boy. Even before the birth of his son, Lori gave in and married Maria. Now, of course, there was no real celebration, and the young people quietly signed, trying not to look each other in the eyes. Life went on as usual. Maria and her son moved into a new, large, and comfortable apartment, which Lori's parents had bought for them. Lori himself, as you can well understand, was not going to live in it, and Maria did not want to live with him under the same roof. At first, Lori was in a constant frenzy. He didn't want to see this girl who was twisting him around her finger, let alone her bastard. And Maria, being already a married woman and not needing anything thanks to the support of her own, her mother-in-law still did not give up her favorite job. After experiencing all the events described above, the young woman has only grown stronger. She finally put all those who had once made fun of her in their place. Now, no one dared to cross her path. After 4 months on maternity leave and leaving her young son in the care of a nanny, Maria didn't hesitate to fire Molly. She was tired of putting up with the antics of her former partner, and the chief now they have become really related people. And even Maria named her son after her beautiful boss, Nick. The kid, a little older, began to call the old man grandfather, which he was delighted. Time passed, and Maria could not leave the thought of her Mike. She every day remembered their long-ago meeting, regretting that she refused the guy on a date. And she kept thinking, maybe I should have married Lori for nothing. I could never be happy with him. These thoughts didn't make the woman happy, but she was afraid to change anything. After all, he was the father of her child, and his parents had done the most decent thing for her. Family ties were more important than anything to her, having grown up without relatives. Or was it? Lori was slowly getting used to his new life. His notorious freedom was still not threatened by anything but a stamp in his passport. But after a few years of dissolute life, he suddenly realized that he terribly wants to see his son. Maria did not deny him this desire. I remember that he is the boy's own father, and the child is not guilty of anything. To everyone's surprise, unlucky. Both father and little son quickly found common ground. "Mommy, my daddy is so good, delighted," said Nick. "He can grunt like a real pig." Maria didn't know whether to laugh or cry at such a message from her son. getting older over the years. Lori had actually rethought a lot of things. One crisp evening, he decided to do something important. "Maria, hi, could you meet me?" "What is it?" "There's no way we can discuss this over the phone," Maria asked, putting Nick's things in a neat stack. "No. Can I come to your place?" "All right," she shrugged. "Come over, just don't be late. Nick's in bed by 9. Opening the door. An hour after this conversation, she was stunned. Behind the huge bouquet, not even Lori's face was visible, saying nothing. He stepped inside, knelt down on the bottom of her knee, and handed her a small red box. "What's this for Lori?" The woman, perplexed, looked at her fictitious spouse. "Are you up to your old tricks again?" "Maria, no. What are you?" "It's been so many years. I've changed. Don't you see? I've been thinking a lot, and I finally realized I really love you. All I want is to live together with you and our son." He looked into her eyes, hoping to see tears of joy there. But Maria's face expressed absolutely nothing. Maria looked calmly at her so-called husband. He was kneeling before her again. This time so pathetic, exactly pathetic. She felt nothing but pity for him. "You are hopelessly too late for that, my dear." She smiled at last, with only her lips. "It seems that now you and I are at last even." "Maria." He tried to grab her hand, but she yanked it away sharply. "No, Lori, you can see Nick whenever you want." "What about me? I don't love you anymore. I don't think I've ever really loved you. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." A leisurely gait. A young, beautiful, self-confident woman walked along the embankment, reaching the very bench where she and the girls used to sit many years ago. She smiled, went to the ice cream stand, bought herself the biggest cone, and with a satisfied sigh, sat down and looked at the bay. Now she knew for sure that there was not and had never been a place in her heart for Lori ever. Her big loving heart belonged to only 3 living beings in this vast world: her little son, her named Father Nick, and the old fat cat. But maybe there's room in it for someone else. Who knows? In the distance, a male figure gradually emerged from the fog. It drew closer, taking on a familiar shape, and finally became fully embodied. "Maria, hello. How nice to see you. How are you? What's new with you?" he asked. He sits down next to me. "Hello, Mike. I called you to tell you that I divorced my husband yesterday." Maria smiled. "And if your heart's still not in the right place, maybe we could go out." "Definitely go out." He smiled happily. A year and a half later, the same embankment again received these two, but already in the company of a pretty pink wheelchair and a completely gray-haired, but still very cheerful and confident man. The whole company was leisurely walking along the bay, every now and then peeking into the cute transportation and succussing with its passenger. Reaching a kiosk with ice cream, they met a tall, handsome man who brought a boy of about 7 years old and handed him to them from hand to hand. The happy family slowly left, and the boy after some time turned around and waved to the man, and he answered him with a smile, waved back happily, and then did not leave, but stood in one place near the ice cream stand and looked after them for a long time.